Okay, we're recording now.
Okay.
So before we start, I just wanted to ask you, Dean Doria, have you had the chance to sign the consent form yet?
No, because they can't get it to be signed up by computer. So, but I did give them an email with permission, so no problem.
Okay, let me just ask you the question. Okay. All right, you know what? Since you gave them written permission, that should be fine. I'm sorry.
Lauren said it was fine.
Okay. Thank you. So my name is Janine Abu Ali. I'm a senior at St. Peter's University, studying history and political science with a minor in gender and sexuality studies. And Dean Doria, can you please introduce yourself and spell your name slowly?
I'm Joseph Doria, Doria, and I'm presently the Dean of the School of Education at St. Peter's University. I've been actively involved with St. Peter's since I was a freshman in 1964. So we're talking well over 50 years. In one way or another, I have been tied to the school. Just you're president of the John Caulfield History Society, right?
I am not. I am actually his secretary of the history club.
Okay, you're secretary. Well, John Coughlin was a professor when I was at St. Peter's, and he actually hired me back to teach history when I got out of graduate school at Boston College. So I knew John Coughlin very well. He was a very, very good medieval. He was a medievalist. He taught medieval history when we had about 8 people in the history department.
Amazing.
For a minute, your sound went out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. I apologize about that.
No, that it just went down again.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Sorry. 1 second. Okay. How about now? Can you hear me clearly now?
Perfect. Right now. Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. So today is April 2nd, 2021, and we are here because of St. Peter's 150th anniversary, and we're doing an oral history project. So thank you so much for joining us, Dean Doria. I'm really glad to have the opportunity to learn more about you and your history at St. Peter's. So to start off, can you please tell me about your childhood? If you would like to describe your childhood, your family, and where you grew up before you came to St. Peter's.
Well, I've always lived in the city of Bayonne, except for when I was in graduate school at Boston College, for my master's. So I was born and raised in Bayonne, New Jersey, which is south of Jersey City in St. Peter's. My family is Italian. My mother was born in New York City, but she didn't learn English until she started kindergarten in the New York City public school system. Her primary language was Italian. Her parents came from Italy. And my father was born in Italy and served in the First World War, came here as an immigrant in 1920. So my family background is Italian. I went to the Catholic school system, basically. My elementary school was Our Lady of the Assumption Parish in Bayonne, the parish school. I went to Marist High School in Bayonne, and then went to St. Peter's College at that time. My family was typical at that time, an immigrant family. They spoke mostly Italian at home, actually Italian mixed with English. And we used to go back and forth. My father worked in a factory making cables. And my mother basically was a homemaker. Only worked for like 2 or 3 years at one point, but otherwise she never really worked. My mother was 17 when she got married. My father was 29. It was an arranged marriage. They were married for 56 years until my mother passed away. So the arranged marriages do work in many instances. I have two older sisters. Both my sisters presently, they became nuns. One, they both are members of the Sisters of St. Lucy Filippini, which was the order of nuns that taught at the elementary school that I went to. So they are, and they're older than I am. So, and my family, was a typical family. When I was young, we never went out to eat in a restaurant. We, went to family events, family, holidays. We lived in a two-family house. My aunt and uncle and my cousins lived downstairs, and we lived upstairs. So it was a traditional immigrant type of experience. My father never drove. We never had a car, which a lot of people are amazed at. But yeah, we took public transportation everywhere.
Were you a first generation college student, Dean Doria?
Yep, first generation college student, no one else in the family. My sisters that went to college, but my parents, no. My mother had a junior high school education. My father had a third grade education in Italy, but yet he couldn't, when he came here, he learned how to read and write English. And my father loved to read. And so he very well educated, but self-educated.
Are your parents proud of you? You've had a great career and you've done
Well,
many different things.
yes, they were obviously. They passed away before I did a number of things, but
Mm,
my mother lived to be 74. My father lived to be 93. He was born in 1900 and died 1993.
mm.
So he got to see a lot more.
You've mentioned that your family came from Italy. And you mentioned, do you have a Catholic background, Dean Doria?
Oh yeah. Well, obviously my two
Yeah.
sisters are nuns. Yes.
Yeah.
No, we were. The church was very important, and no, yeah, we were. Everybody went to the same parish. That was an Italian parish in Bayonne. All the relatives, friends, and the closeness, the a large group from the same town in Italy that my father came from and my mother's father came from. Um, no, they came from that same town to Bayonne, and so there was a lot, not only actual relatives, but a lot of what Italians call paesans, which are people from the same town. And so everybody, even though they may not have been related, knew everybody from the town and their families in Italy.
Do you still keep in contact with some of those people?
Well, yeah, a number of them, their children or grandchildren, and no, my cousins. So I do. Oh yes.
I'm wondering if your background is something that brought you to St. Peter's College, and if it wasn't, can you please tell me what did bring you to St.
Well,
Peter's?
basically, it was the background. I mean, it was not. It was a case of where my parents, my parents always said to me, "You decide where you want to go." And so I went to Marist. I picked Marist, and they had to scrape together the money. Then, unfortunately, I had a scholarship to St. Peter's, so I went to St. Peter's.
What did you major or minor in while you were in St. Peter's, and why did you choose that course of study?
Well, I was a history major,
Mhm.
so because I liked history, and my father was very much into history and got me interested in history from a young age. He talked to me about the Romans and talked to me about the Greeks and talked to me about the history of the world, and so I always had an interest in history. So my primary major was history. I ended up doing an English major and a French major also when I was there. I graduated with 170 some odd credits because I didn't have to pay for them. And in those days, you could take as many credits as you wanted. So I graduated from St. Peter's with about 170 credits with a 3.76. So no, I enjoyed school. That was what I was. I wasn't into sports. I wasn't into anything but reading and watching like baseball, Yankees, but otherwise I was into taking. I would take courses in the summer. I take courses, whenever I could, and so and I took education too, because I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and my father said, "But lawyers don't always do well, so you should do something else." So then I took education so I could teach, and I eventually did that rather than go to law school.
That is incredible. How did you possibly keep up with all of that?
In those days, it was easier in the sense we had a trimester system in the undergraduate day school. So when I started, it was a typical semester system where the semester ended after the holidays, and you'd have your tests in January for the first term, for the first semester. Then my junior year, we went to a trimester day school. So you would have 3 terms, more classes per term. So you could take more courses that way. You were only supposed to take like 9 credits. I'd still take 12 or 15 per trimester. And so I was very fortunate that I was able to do that. And I was very fortunate I was able to keep my grades up. Um, and I was the only interests I had when I was at St. Peter's, I was involved in student activities. So I was very active in Gannon Debating Society. I was active in student government. At that time, there was a curricular council and a co-curricular council. And the co-curricular was like newspaper, debating, the Peacock Pie, the yearbook. But then the curricular council was like the political science forum, the history club, the education club, and I was president of that in my senior year. So I was very active. I was a Blue Key member in my junior year, and so I was a member. I was was in the honors program. That's why I took a lot of courses too, because the honors program required you taking additional courses. So I was very active in school activities, and I worked. My first summer at St. Peter's, I worked at maintenance, painting the ceilings in all the buildings. So I used to be covered from head to toe with paint because painting the ceiling. And then after that, I got a job in the bookstore. And I used to work in the bookstore at nights. I was the night manager for all intents and purposes. I actually ran the bookstore at night. I'd have some other students helping me, but I actually opened and closed it, had the accommodation to the safe, and actually ran the bookstore. So I worked at night. So I was around the school from the morning, first thing in the morning, till 9 o'clock at night. And then I'd take the bus home. So it was, I was always at St. Peter's, involved in different things.
That is amazing. And actually, I wanted to ask you selfishly, because I'm a history major, I wanted to know more about your history major. What kind of classes did you take, and how were the professors? You mentioned that there were 8 professors. Were there any female professors at that time?
Not at first. By my senior year, Dr. Parmigiano, who was an English historian, came to St. Peter's. She came by my senior year, but up to that time, there were no female faculty members in history. So there was John Caulfield was a medievalist. Another professor, Professor Sawchuk, was Eastern European. So there were different specialties. Professor Capilouti was French history, French Revolution. Then there was in English, in American history, there was Professor Platt and Professor Cannon. Professor Cannon was more current American history. Professor Platt was more of the Civil War period. And then there was Professor Looney, who left in my junior year, who I had after my junior year, who was a colonial history teacher. So there was different backgrounds for the different faculty members. So I had an opportunity. I was an American history major, and there were a number of classes like we did. Professor Cannon worked together with Professor Hager in English to teach American cultural history. They team taught the course as an honors course for a year in my junior year. So I took, as I say, mostly American history. Took a course in Latin American history, a course in urban American history. So I did mostly American. That was my specialization. And then I wrote a dissertation for the honors program on Silas Lapham, The Rise of Silas Lapham by William Dean Howells, discussing the American dream. So that was one of the requirements, as it is today, for the honors program to write basically a long paper, which we call today a capstone project. Then it was called a dissertation.
Would we be able to find your dissertation today in the honors program?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they kept them that far back.
I can ask Dr. Weifel to make sure. I know they've gone digital with a lot of them. That'd be interesting.
No, I don't think they have it from that far back. I actually have a copy somewhere.
I want to also ask, how has your history major helped you? I know today there's not a lot of history majors and a lot of schools are cutting programs like history and liberal arts. I want to know how that type of major has helped you and what you think of those new changes.
Well, I think a history major gave me the opportunity to broaden my perspective. And and as I said, I like to read, so I read a lot, and both as undergraduate and a graduate, and in the area. And so it gave me the ability to be very flexible. It taught me how to think, and it taught me how to look at the various issues that I had to deal with when I was in government. The other very important part of my education at St. Peter's was the Gannon Debating Society. I was never I was always a little backwards, a little shy. You can't believe that today, but then I was. But when I came to St. Peter's, I joined the Gannon Debating Society myself and my good friend, John Trojan, who I had gone to high school with, and neither one of us had debated. And we joined the Gannon Debating Society. And that really gave me the ability to think quickly on my feet, to be able to organize my thoughts, to present them verbally, to do all of those things that needed to be done. So between the coursework, the history, the English, it gave me a broad perspective. And the humanities helped me to have a good knowledge in a lot of different areas. Now that I can speak intelligently about it, and my interest in reading helped, and my friends helped. I mean, I probably learned as much from my friends. One of my good friends, Henry Mundo, who passed, really helped to broaden my perspective too. He was a debater from high school. He had gone to St. Peter's Prep. He was the president of the student government. He was a year younger than me. The year after I graduated, and he worked with me in the bookstore. So we were able to all of us develop our intellectual abilities working together. So I learned as much from the students I became friends with at St. Peter's as I did from the faculty. And that's important. That's very important. I think that's still true today and still should be, because you learn from each other. You learn about their backgrounds, you learn about their culture, you learn about who they are, but you also learn about what they're learning, and you share. And you take some courses together, that helps.
Was the student body, would you say the student body was diverse when you were a student?
diverse ethnically. That's about it. I mean, it was basically when I came to St. Peter's, one of the man who was dean, and then later vice president, uh, Father Ed Ryan. When he came, the dean at that time, Father Leo McLaughlin, who eventually became president of St. Peter's and eventually president of Fordham, asked him after he looked at the program and all, what did he see? And the response was, St. Peter's was still high school. It was, you still came in, all the classes were homogeneously grouped. So when you came in, if you were liberal arts, you were in the A section, and A through J. And if you were in business, you were in the double A section. And so the better students were in the A, then it was B, then it was C, D. It was like a high school. And you followed a certain format. In my first 2 years, that's how St. Peter's was. By my junior year, that's when the girls were admitted for the first time, and the trimester program was put in. It became more like a college where you picked your own courses and there was a little more flexibility. Not a lot more, but a little more flexibility. So it became more like a college than a high school. So it changed during the time I was there. It changed in the sense that the women came in. The schedule became much more flexible. And what you could take, became much more flexible. In my freshman year, I had no choice. I took whatever they gave you, just like in high school. But by my junior year, you had choice. So that started. And that's obviously continued. Most of the school at the time I was there was a lot of students out of St. Peter's Prep. When I started, it was all boys. They were mostly Irish, Italian, Polish. With a smattering, there was a few Jewish students. St. Peter's always had some Jewish students because the good Jewish students, because of discrimination, didn't get into some of the high-level schools in the country. They came to Jesuit schools, and so St. Peter's did always have some Jewish. There was a few African-American and a few Hispanic, but not a lot. And obviously today, St. Peter's, excuse my dogs. Okay, we have to take a break. St. Peter's was always open. It was an open school in the sense they treated everybody fairly, and that was important. But today St. Peter's is much more diverse. And that's changing times. The first generation students are of different ethnic groups. The makeup of the community is different. Hudson County was like 80% Catholic when I was growing up. Jersey City, Bayonne, North Hudson, and even then, the Cubans were coming in, so there were Cuban students, but they were Catholic too. So it was basically a very insular type of area with a large number. The county had turned over from being basically Protestant to Catholic in the latter part of the 19th and then the 20th century. And the Irish dominated, but then the Italians, and there was a beginning of a change to have a better blending, but still was the Irish controlled a lot of the power within the community.
Dean Doria, you touched on something that actually you answered one of my questions that I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you, how was it when St. Peter's became co-ed in 1966? What was the environment like in the college, as you were somebody who went into St. Peter's when it was an all-male school and then it became co-ed? How was that? How was the shift? How did it happen? Was it smooth?
Well, it wasn't as smooth as you would think. The first 100 girls that came in the fall of 1966. Didn't have the easiest time. They were the best of the best. You know, like Gene Brody would say, la creme de la creme. They were the best students, the valedictorians, the salutatorians from all of the girls' high schools, the Catholic high schools, as well as the public. And when they came in, there was a lot of us who thought it was a great idea, but there was a whole group that didn't want girls. There was a group of boys, students, who had buttons on saying, "This is a man's school, get out." So it took a while for the integration, but within a year, there was no problems. But at first, there was a great deal of angst on the part of certain students, male students, about having women in the school. There was also some of the faculty. One or two of the Jesuits didn't think that they weren't supported, and they actually left. Some of the faculty left because they didn't. And it was. I remember the art history teacher at that time was Spanish from Spain, and she was very good. Her name was Madame Gova. And she wouldn't stay because she said that she could not teach the beauty of the human form, especially the beauty of a woman's form, to women students. Sounds contradictory, but she left. No, which is weird. You would think it would be only male, but she left because she felt that way, and she expressed it. I had her in art history in my sophomore year. That was one of the add-on courses that you had to take if you were in the honors program. You had to take 2 semesters of art history. So I mean, it was a mix, but it was most of the women, the girls were accepted very quickly. It just took a year for those who had questions. And the ones that were the most vociferous against it ended up having girlfriends by the next year. So, I mean, it was a little bit of a process, quickly overcome.
Dean Doria, can you tell me about a friendship that took root at St. Peter's, or about a professor that left an influential impression on you?
Well, as I said, my friendship with Henry Raimondo of happy memory was very important to me. He and, well, John Trojan and I had been friends from high school, so we continued our friendship. He was a business major, he was an accounting major, so we didn't take hardly any classes together, but we still maintained our close friendship. But Henry, who was a year younger and had come from St. Peter's Prep, and I had come from Marist, we got to know each other. That friendship was very important to me. It helped me to grow and to develop and to have confidence in myself. He built up a great deal of confidence in me, which allowed me to then do a lot of what I did in life. And we maintained a friendship until he passed away suddenly when he was 51 years old. So that friendship with him and with the faculty was Professor Don Cannon, who was an American history professor, who was my mentor when I wrote the senior thesis, who really encouraged me in history and was always there to be of help. And I considered him a friend. There was a lot of faculty members I considered friends, but he most of all. He was very supportive, and he encouraged me and he helped me to succeed. So those 2 things, the concept of cora personalis was there when I was there. It's there today. It's there about caring for the students. You had positive relationships with the faculty. I took all those French courses because I loved the French teacher, Dr. Dunn, John Dunn. He was chair of the French department. And I took those courses because he was such a great teacher and he was such a good guy. And so I ended up taking, at that time, which would be considered French major, 27 credits in French because of him. So there were a lot of good faculty members. Um, Professor Parmigiano, when she came in, I never took her, but she recommended me for the history award when I graduated. So there there were so many different faculty members who were great teachers and great advisors, and really had an influence on all of us. So it was a very, and including the administrators. You know, when I came in as a freshman, Father Clark was president, and then when he retired, he left. Um, Father McLaughlin was president for 2 months, and suddenly he was supposed to stay for a few years, but the president of Fordham resigned, and in those days the Jesuits just moved the Jesuits around. So he was in line to be president of Fordham, so he moved from St. Peter's to Fordham. And Father Yanatelli, who was in charge of student services, became the president. And he was an amazing man who I got to know a little bit as a student. But then when I was an alumnus, when I came back to the college, I spent a great deal of time with him. He became a very good friend and an advisor, a confidant, someone who learned a great deal from. I considered him a mentor. And I was fortunate. I had a lot of faculty, a lot of people at St. Peter's I consider mentors, both faculty members and, as I said, other students. And so that all helped me develop. So St. Peter's gave me the ability to succeed in a number of things I was able to do in my lifetime.
Great. Actually, speaking of Jesuits, I've noticed that not a lot of Jesuits teach at St. Peter's anymore. I had Father Majewski, but that was the only Jesuit that I had as a professor. Were there a lot of professors who were
At that time,
Jesuits?
there were a lot more Jesuits because there were a lot more Jesuits who were, the order was much larger. Obviously, over the years and changing times, you don't have the same number. But when I was at St. Peter's, St. Peter Hall, which is now a student dormitory, all of those rooms were filled by Jesuits who lived there. So there was about easily 50 Jesuits. And so they were teaching in every department. And so you had Jesuits. A lot of them were scholastics. And what a scholastic is it would be they would come out, and before they were ordained for like 2 years or 3 years, they'd work doing teaching, and then eventually they get ordained and continue on. So they hadn't completed all of their studies. But for example, Father Lochran, who eventually became president of St. Peter's before Dr. Cornacchia, he was a scholastic at St. Peter's, and I knew him when he was there back in the 60s. And you got to be friends with them because they were young. Then you would hang out with them. They'd hang out in the gym. You'd go out on Friday night to a movie. You got to know the Jesuits very well. And one of them, that time, his name was Dick Brennan, was again a debate moderator. So got very close, and he taught sociology. So yes, there were a lot of Jesuits doing a lot of things. And like I said, Father Ryan, who eventually became the executive vice president, became a friend. And he eventually became the senior vice president down Georgetown. And I used to go visit him when I was working at St. Peter's. I had to go to Washington for various things. And he eventually became the president of the University of Seattle and Seattle, Washington. So, I mean, yeah, you developed relationships with the Jesuits as you did with the lay faculty. And no, it was a whole different, no, because there were so many of them getting involved in activities, getting teaching, you got to know them and you got to know them well. Today, there aren't as many. I mean, you have Father Majewski, you have Father Rocco, no, for the Downey, but there's not as many.
Dean Doria, you mentioned the Gannett Debate Club multiple times. Were you also involved outside of St. Peter's in different organizations or maybe in government and city government as an intern? Did you have any internships?
No, those days there weren't really, you didn't really do internships like you do today. And it was not an accepted way of doing things. I really wasn't involved in much other than St. Peter's. I was involved in my church, obviously, here. And the church to a degree, Knights of Columbus. There was a chapter of the Knights of Columbus that we founded at the school, and then we were involved a little bit with the chapter in Bayonne, but it wasn't like today where you go out and do internships. Everything was really tied into the institution. There were, by the time I came back in like 69, 70, there was many more internships. So everything was changing in the late 60s. Obviously, it was a time of a lot of change, like today, a lot of upheaval. And so that was taking place at that time. There were more opportunities for internships. There was one internship that it did exist, and my friend Henry and a number of students went, and they went to be interns down the Peace Corps because one of the top people at the Peace Corps set up a program with St. Peter's. Had been a graduate of a Jesuit college, and so some of my friends went down to Washington for like 10 weeks to a Peace Corps internship. But that was one of the few that existed.
What did you do after graduation, Dean Doria?
Okay. Well, what happened is, as I said, I was involved in student government. I was involved, and one of the things I want to mention is one of the things we did right at just as I was graduating in the summer after graduation is we put together for the first time a student evaluation of faculty that was published. I have a copy somewhere that I keep on promising to give the library. But it was put together by myself and Henry Raimondo and a number of other students that we got the students to survey the teachers. And it was the first time that was revolutionary at the time. It was the first time that was done. And then it was given to the students so they knew a little bit about who the faculty members were, who were the real good ones and the ones that were real dogs, because both always exist. And so, and after I graduated, I had a couple of fellowships to go on to study for a master's, and I wanted to go on. And I had the opportunity to go to a number of schools, Virginia, NYU, but I selected Boston College, which is another Jesuit school, and because they had an American Studies program. And I went to Boston for the 68, 69 school year and got my master's a year. And then I came back and I got this John Coughlin, who I mentioned earlier, asked me to teach. And I taught in the evening. And in those days, the evening school was as large as the day school. Every classroom in Deneen and McDermott, because they were the two classroom buildings, and a few in Gannon, were full at night with classes. And so when I came back, and I taught in high school for a while, at an all-girls high school, you'd be interested, in Bayonne, Holy Family Academy, and coached debate and speech. Then when I came back, I taught history. And so I taught American history, but I taught German history, taught Civil War, American cultural history. And because in those days, all the electives were being offered in the evening too. Now today, you can't find a history elective in the evening for sure. And even in the day, it's not that easy. But in those days, there were a lot of electives and a lot of students taking them. And when I went to graduate school, I took courses in German history, so I taught German history. And of course, I knew the French from having taken all the French courses. But yeah, so I came back and I taught, and I also got involved. I was the Alumni Association, and there was a big discussion at that time that they needed the Alumni Association. Most of the members of the board of trustees of the alumni were older alumnus, and so um, the head of at that time the executive director of the alumni, Fred Jacks, was looking for a younger alumnus, and so he came to me and said, "I can trust you. You want to come on the board?" So I went on the board of the Alumni Association almost immediately. And so I was actively involved with the alumni and alumni events, things. We used to have a dinner called the Cerruti dinner where we cook Italian food for the junior class. They would have a dinner with their parents, and the alumni would cook. And we do that. And I was involved in phone-a-thons, ran the phone-a-thon one year. Eventually, I became president of the Alumni Association in the 70s, early 70s, and eventually the fund drive chairman. And my friend John Trojan and I both did it together. One year I was president, he was fund drive chairman. Next year he was president, and I was fund drive chairman. So we did that back then. So I was actively involved with the alumni during that period and then I was also urban coordinator, which was the title I originally got hired as. And that was working at that time that was a big thing, after the riots in the late 60s and all the upheaval. St. Peter's was actively involved. Father Yanatelli was president. And so we had a lot of involvement with the community, doing projects in the community, running programs, both funded by the city and funded by the feds, Model Cities program, community development program. At that time, there was the CETA program, temporary employment for workers in the city. So we were actively involved in the school. And so I ran a number of those programs. And I spent a lot of time with Father Yanatelli because he was the president of the Jersey City Board of Education. And so I went to a lot of meetings and learned a lot about the boards of education, which helped me when I became president of the board in the late 70s in Bayonne. And we also, and a lot of people don't realize this, St. Peter's, there was no community college in Hudson County in the early 70s. And then St. Peter's, together with Jersey City State at that time, and Stevens, felt that there was a need for a community college. So we actually, the three schools together applied for a Ford Foundation grant, which basically established the community college. And during that time, the community college was a college without walls, which meant that the courses were being run by the schools. But St. Peter's ran most of the courses. And so my office was responsible for the running the courses for the community college. And I was on the board of the community college. The presidents ran it, but I was a secretary treasurer. And I was involved in getting the students to register, and with the community college personnel that were hired. And it was, so all the first classes that the Hudson County Community College ran were at St. Peter's. So my office at that time, the title changed from urban coordinator to director of educational services. And so we started up running educational services. We ran not only the community college courses, but we started the relationship with nursing schools. We had no nursing program at St. Peter's at that time, even though during the Second World War, when all the men were out fighting, the nursing program was run at the school. But then when the war ended, that nursing program disappeared. And so we ran the college courses for the schools of nursing, At that time, Holy Name was the first. Holy Name Hospital in Passaic was the first hospital that we ran the courses for. Then we ran them for Christ Hospital, Medical Center, Bayonne, um, Jersey, no, all of the St. Francis Hospital. We ran all of the college courses. So that was the beginning of the nursing program at St. Peter's. And by 1981, the college had created its own BSN program. So that was, it started, that's how it started. And so my office was where it began. We also ran a program called Women in the World, which was well ahead of its time. We ran it in conjunction with the YWCA in Jersey City and Bayonne. And that program was to get women to get involved in business and in community activities. It was taught by two women. And we sponsored that program. It was not for credit. And it was an opportunity to get women involved and going out into the workforce and giving them the tools they needed. And that was something that, again, St. Peter's was actively involved in, and my office ran it. So that was, in the 70s, we were doing a lot of that kind of transitioning into programs. And my office was like a catch-all. Whenever somebody didn't know what to do with something, they gave it to me. I ran the summer school. I set up the first intercession courses, which was a big thing, 3-week courses, which created a lot of controversy. Some of the dean of the day school at the time really didn't like it. I got into trouble, but fortunately the vice president, they were both Jesuits, and the vice president, Father Canavan, said he thought it was a good idea, and he gave me the go-ahead, and he actually had me run the summer session and create that program.
Why was it controversial?
Well, to run a course in that short a period at that time was unheard of. It was just starting to happen at other schools, and we started. It was 1978 when we just started that. So we were doing that, and at the same time, St. Peter's was changing, was growing. With Father Yanatelli resigned as president in 1978, and Father Glenn came that July of 78 and became president. I've had the opportunity to serve under 7 presidents, to be at the school from Father Clark through Dr. Cornacchia. I remember when Dr. Cornacchia was hired in 1981. He came from Fordham as a political science professor. So so the school was changing. I mean, over time, the school has adapted and changed to meet the needs of the students and the community. And that's important. And it has to continue to do that. So that's a big part of the process.
Was there a lot of controversy when Dr. Cornacchia became president of St. Peter's because he wasn't a Jesuit?
Not really. I mean, he had been such an important part of St. Peter's before, and both as a faculty member, president of the faculty senate, then became dean, and then moved up to academic vice president and provost. He was in all intents and purposes, he was a Jesuit. I mean, he had been at the school a long time, like a lot of us. He was imbued with the principles and the concepts and the ideals of the university. And he continues to extend it. So there wasn't, there was among some of the older alumni, there was some little angst, but nothing significant. Things change, life changes, the world changes. St. Peter's has had to change. We all changed. I changed, as I said, I went through a lot of different jobs here at St. Peter's. In 78, I took over human resources, personnel, and ran that. I was director. I was the equal opportunity affirmative action officer for a number of years. I ran some community-based programs. You've done a lot of different things, and you over time you adapt, you change, and that's again the humanities, the liberal arts helps you to do that, to be able to look at an issue and find a solution. I mean, even becoming dean of the School of Education. I never had been a dean of the School of Education, but again, you have the ability to learn, adapt, and then develop what you've started. Now that takes now it takes the knowledge and the abilities. You have to have abilities, but it also takes the willingness to continue learning, and that's what liberal arts gives you, and that's what the humanities give you. The ability to continue to learn. You can't stop learning. No matter how old you are, no matter what you've done, you continue to learn.
Are you worried about the future of the liberal arts and humanities at St. Peter's?
Not really. I think it's going to have to adapt and change, but it'll be there. I'm worried more about the students not realizing how important it is and that there's a need to have it. That with the knowledge you gain from the liberal arts, you can do anything, almost anything. I wouldn't want to try to be a physics professor or a mathematician, but otherwise, I think I can do most other things. And over my life, I've had the ability, as I say, I got involved in the government and politics. And I did that. I got involved because of Father Yanatelli, because of all the time I spent with him going to community meetings, going to Board of Education meetings, dealing with problems. There was something called the Mayor's Task Force on Education, and I was the secretary of that. Father Yanatelli was the co-chair with the president of Jersey City State. And so I learned from that. So, and he was involved in the Port Authority. He was involved in so many things. He was a unique man. His personality, his abilities, he was the nicest man you ever want to meet, but he could make decisions and he could get along with anybody. And he did. I mean, St. Peter's became so active in the community because of him. He was president when Dr. King got his honorary degree. I mean, he was ahead of his times in many ways. So I learned from him. I consider him a mentor, another mentor. You have to have a lot of different mentors in your life for different things. So I got involved in government. I got involved by running for the Board of Ed because I had been doing it in Jersey City, and became and won and became president of the Bayonne Board of Education. And we got a lot of things done there. I was there for 5 years, and then I had the opportunity to run for the legislature. And St. Peter's gave me the opportunity to serve in the legislature and still work at St. Peter's, which was unique. They allowed me to do that. And I was in the legislature 27, almost 28 years. And the flexibility St. Peter's gave me to do that. I still did my job at St. Peter's, but I was able to get everything done while at the same time being in the legislature. When Father Degnan came as president in 1990, as he was being introduced to all the people who worked at the school. Father Degnan had been the dean at Seton Hall Law School, and he was a lawyer by profession. He had been a lawyer before he became a Jesuit, and actually had been in the Navy. And when they introduced him to me, me to him, and he found out at that time I was Speaker of the General Assembly, which in New Jersey is the third highest position. He was totally flabbergasted. He didn't realize that. And he kept on saying, "Oh, that's great. That's great." Oh, no. And he was very supportive, just as Father Glenn had been and Father Yanatelli. And, so St. Peter's gave me that opportunity to do that. And, and I try to give back by helping and doing things to help higher education and education in general. I was chair of the Higher Education Committee and education committees in the legislature, both in the Assembly and then the Senate. So those were things. So that was all opportunities, having worked at St. Peter's, as they say, having been alumni president. And then when I left St. Peter's in 1998, because my political mentor, Dennis Collins, convinced me to run for mayor in Bayonne, and that would means it was a full-time job. I couldn't stay at St. Peter's. And Father Lochran kept on, who was president then. He became president in 1995. Used to tease me, and as I said, we knew each other from when he was younger and I was younger. He kept on saying to me, "Well, if you lose, I'm going to fire you. You got to go." And I said, "Well, I think I'm going to win." And I did, and I had to leave. But then he, another year and a half later, put me on the board of trustees. So I was served on the board for 10 years. So even in those years when I wasn't working at St. Peter's, I was put on the board of trustees. So I saw St. Peter's from a different point of view. And that was interesting to see how things worked from the upper echelons. And then in 2011, I came back and was teaching adjunct in the doctoral program in education. And I figured I was doing consulting. And a surprise, Mary Lou Yam, and Dr. Kornakia asked me to come back as dean of the School of Education. And I came back, and now I'm in my 10th year, surprisingly. So 10 years more. So I've actually been working at St. Peter's for almost 40 years, and then 10 years on the board.
How is it different serving on the board rather than working for St. Peter's as like a teacher or in some of the other positions you held?
Well, it was different in that's in a more supervisory, general policy making. Board is a policy making body. It doesn't make day-to-day decisions. When you're in an administrative position, you're doing day-to-day decisions, dealing with day-to-day problems. At the board, you're dealing with policy, you're dealing with bigger issues, you're dealing with the direction of the university and how the university has to continue to develop and the programs that have to be added and to survive. So it's one is more policy, the other is definitely much more operational. So it's two different, and it's like a board of education, same thing. Board of education is a policy-making body, not the administrative body. No, so where did you go to high school?
I went to North Bergen High School, so I'm actually from Hudson County.
So okay, so you went to North Bergen. So
Yeah.
the administration there, Dr. Salter, he was superintendent when you were there, I would think. Dr. Salter, he makes the day-to-day policy. He runs the teachers report to him, the administrators report to him, just like at St. Peter's, everyone reports to the president, to Dr. Kornakia. But the Board of Education makes the policy that he reports to the Board of Education. Dr. Kornakia reports to the board of the university. So it's a policy-making body that creates the general direction, and then the chief administrator, Dr. Salter in North Bergen, Dr. Kornakia at St. Peter's, then follows those general outlines, and then has administrators under him like Dr. Bonato, or the deans like myself and Dr. Wade Dong and Dr. Natus. Okay, to follow through to then run the day-to-day operations and deal with the nitty-gritty detail. So it's two different things. Mayor's in that position within a municipality, working with a council. So I've been in both. I've been in both running things at a policy level, and then also being an administrator.
Did you find that even though they were two different things, they still had the same purpose and mission, especially as it came to that Jesuit mission, Cura Personalis, men and women for others?
I think so. I think, no, I believe very much so. The board, when I was on it, very much followed that and emphasized the importance of that. A lot of the board members are alumni, and they're aware of what the tradition is and what our mission is, and they strongly support that mission. And so, yes, I do think so. I think that they do truly believe. You wouldn't do it if you didn't believe in it. You wouldn't give your time freely in a volunteer position, because those are volunteer positions, if you didn't believe in the mission and the purpose of the institution that you're serving.
So Dean Doria, we touched on this a little bit, but we didn't exactly get to it. You mentioned a lot of changes while you were at St. Peter's. What were the larger societal issues during your time at St. Peter's, and what impact did they have on the community? I am particularly interested in Dr. King's visit to St. Peter's, and some of the other larger issues that you'd like to talk about.
Well, obviously, when I was a student in the 60s, there was a lot of change going on, a lot of angst, a lot of, similar to today in many ways. There was a change in society, changing mores, changing cultural concepts. The basic, philosophy was there, but it was time. The younger people believed that it was necessary for change to take place, and change doesn't happen quickly, and change is not easily accepted by anybody. Life is about change. Change is always going on, but it's difficult. And so in the 60s, there was the change, the Vietnam War, the whole opposition to the war, the issue of equality and discrimination. Dr. King, the movement, which was violence free. He believed in change through action, but not violent action. So there was that going on. And at St. Peter's, we had speakers. I wish I could remember, besides Dr. King, one of the other big civil rights leaders of that time came to spoke in the quadrangle. And I'm trying to, he was a leader in the civil rights movement.
Bayard Rustin.
Bayard Rustin, that's right. How did you know that it was Bayard Rustin?
Learned about him in class. Okay. And how he came to St. Peter's.
Yeah, Bayard Rustin was there, and I was there when he spoke. So Bayard Rustin, who was again a very unique person. He was gay, and he was also a leader in the civil rights movement for equality. He spoke at St. Peter's. So there was that understanding and appreciation, and the students were going through that. The ROTC, and when I was a student, you had to do 2 years of mandatory ROTC. You had no choice. And they used to explain that took the place of physical education that you would have in high school. And so, but by the end of that time, as I was graduating in 68, Henry Raimondo and a group, and I was a little bit involved in this, actually put together an anti-ROTC orientation for the freshmen coming in September of 1968, saying, we don't need to have this, because there was a real anti-war movement. So the changes were taking place. And within 3 years of when that anti-ROTC orientation, St. Peter's had done away with the requirement that all freshman males had to do ROTC. That was done away with. So yeah, there was those changes. There was that movement, and all the revolution, the sexual revolution, all that taking place, and equality for African Americans, equality for women, I mean, St. Peter's taking in women is a perfect example. So there was, no, that was all happening. And over the years, that's, no, St. Peter's is a reflection of the society it exists in. It takes sometimes a little longer for St. Peter's to get to that, because it is first generation, and the students are more concerned about, getting an education and being able to earn a living and support themselves. So there was took a little longer. But yeah, back in those days, today not as much, but that's because of social media. But I mean, when there was a group against ROTC, there was a lot of the ROTC people who were out there very strongly saying, we need to be in Vietnam. We need to be, have ROTC. When I graduated in '68, over 120 of the male students who graduated were commissioned that day at graduation as second lieutenants. It was actually done at graduation. And they dressed in their uniforms. So the actual swearing in took place. So there was changes. The changes, and today continuing changes. The Black Lives Matter. Some of the changes go a little too far. Cancel culture, in my opinion, goes more than a little too far. You can't reject your historian, so you understand. Santa Anna said it. Those who do not remember history are fated to relive it. Not literally, but you've got to learn from history. You've got to know history. You can't just say it didn't happen. And you can't judge the people of the past by the mores of the present. Because by that, Abraham Lincoln's a racist. But obviously he wasn't. But from our point of view, he is, because of what he believed. He believed the African Americans should be separate. But so did some African Americans. W.E. Du Bois, for an example. So, I mean, you've got to, history is important. But St. Peter's is a reflection of the society it's in and the times that it's in. And it takes sometimes a little longer for it to totally be absorbed, but it happens. But I think today, because of the diversity of our student body, the willingness to have a diverse student body, and the fact that
Dean Doria, you froze. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Did I freeze? Am I okay now?
Oh, yeah, you're okay now, but you froze for a little bit.
Okay, I was probably talking too fast. But no, the St. Peter's, because of the diversity. I mean, you represent part of that diversity. Diversity has helped it to move quicker. And it's great to have that diversity, and that's important. It makes us a better school. It makes us a better part of our society and the community. And the fact that you were willing to come to St. Peter's and your parents were willing to spend the money for you to come to St. Peter's says something. And have you found it a worthwhile experience?
Yeah, I enjoy being a part of the Jesuit tradition. And even though I'm not a Catholic, obviously, I think the Jesuit education is very important. And I'm really happy that I got that experience. And I hope other students get it as well.
Yeah, and that's what it was in the past. As I said, a lot of Jewish students, because they couldn't go to other schools, came to Jesuit schools, including St. Peter's. No, it's, and St. Peter's did a lot of things. Back before EOF, you know what EOF is, of course. Back before EOF existed, St. Peter's created the model. Father Yanatelli, together with Reverend Ursula Webb, who was the pastor of Monumental Baptist Church downtown, and who had been a colonel in the Army and an educator, was assistant superintendent of schools in Jersey City. They created something called Project 25 in 1965. And it was all about a program to help minority students who didn't have all of the abilities and all the opportunities because of discrimination. to come to St. Peter's and succeed. And that program was in existence before EOF, and EOF is based on a lot of those concepts. So it's being willing to do that ahead of time and to be ahead of the curve sometimes. There they were ahead, St. Peter's was ahead of the curve.
I wonder what St. Peter's was like, in your opinion, for those minority students that were there when you were students.
Well, there were a number of them. I remember this one African student who came over. His name was Damien Okabidi. He came from Biafra, which was at that time in turmoil and war. It took a while for them to adapt. It took a while for them to fit in. There weren't as many, so they felt sometimes a little bit outcast. But that they fitted in. A number of them were athletes, like Elnardo Webster, who's been on the board of trustees, and Harry Laurie. It took a while to fit in, but they did, and they became part of the culture. But like all things, it takes a while to adapt.
Were there many student activists with all of the social changes going on at that time?
Oh, sure there were. The faculty and students. Yeah, there was I don't know if you ever heard of SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. Okay, that was a big radical group in the 1960s, and there was a chapter. In fact, I was involved in that controversy because they applied for recognition by the school, and there was a group of people very much opposed, some faculty, students, and as the president of the curricular council, I had to help to make the decision, and we actually approved them, but it was a very controversial. So yeah, there was groups from all spectrums, from the most conservative, the ROTC people, the Pershing Rifles, which was the elite drill team, to the real hippies, and everybody in the middle from both sides. So yes, a lot of diversity.
Would you say that a lot of the activists faced some resistance at St. Peter's, or was it like resistance based on what they were organizing for?
At first, yes, and no, there was always some resistance on a continuing basis, to be expected. But then, no, they were accepted, and no, some of the faculty. There was a faculty member who was in theology, Tom Hessler, who had been at the school for a long period and was very radical, but was accepted. Worked together with the Jesuits because most of the theology department was all Jesuits. And some of the Jesuits were very radical.
So when someone like Bayard Rustin came to campus, what was the reaction like? Or Martin Luther King Jr.?
There was some, usually the students were not that vocal against it. I mean, there was some opposition, but it wasn't like it isn't like today where well, somebody wants to speak and you don't agree with them, you will go out and you try to stifle them. That didn't happen because it still had the discipline of a Jesuit Catholic school. You were even those who wanted to demonstrate were somewhat controlled until the strike in 1969, which was the first time that it went beyond, and that was the more radical group. But they received support too.
Why did they strike?
About ROTC, more student involvement in decision making. It was a whole. Some of them went to jail, and Father Yanatelli went to try to bail them out. It was a whole thing. It was. I wasn't there, so I'm not intimately knowledgeable. But it took place the year after I left.
I had never known that before, actually. Do you know if they were allowed back at St. Peter's?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. They were.
I also wanted to ask you about the Newark Rebellion that occurred in 1967. That wasn't very far
The
from
what?
St. Peter. The Newark rebellions that
I
occurred in
mean,
the in
riots,
1960.
riots, and they took place in Jersey City too.
How was that?
Very, very. The cops were tough. As people complained about police today. Then in Jersey City, the mayor was very conservative, even though Democrat. And there were articles in Time magazine. The Jersey City police actually had shotguns that they carried that were visible in the police cars. It was a very rough time, very difficult time. Um, they didn't take place within the vicinity of St. Peter's, but yes, there was a great deal of you know civil unrest. Not as much as in Newark, but still a lot.
I'm actually interested in the language here because I've been reading more about it, and then there's a lot of activists are saying to like using the language rebellion versus riots. How do you think the people that were going through it, what did they think of it?
Well, I think the best way my use of the word civil unrest. It's not a
Mhm.
riot. It's not a rebellion. It's people being unhappy, demonstrating, and then getting out of control. No, some people taking advantage of the situation as they did this summer, and actually last summer and this summer, where people were peacefully demonstrating, expressing their right to free speech, and other people then on both sides taking advantage of that opportunity to create some chaos and to do criminal acts like break into stores and steal things. Um, my attitude is you have a right to demonstrate, you have a right to speak freely, you don't have a right to destroy property.
I appreciate. I just want to ask you a few more questions. I know I took a lot of your time, Dean Doria, but I'm really appreciative of this, and I learned so much. I actually noticed that a lot of the names you said, I was realizing like, oh, that's the Degnan room. That's who it's named after, because we have like our student senate meetings there, and I had never known that before. So I really appreciate that. I wanted to ask you about the different roles you've held over the years. What was your favorite role overall?
Well, I have to say, at St. Peter's, what I'm doing right now, I enjoyed what I did in the earlier days. I'd say the first, and then what I did at the beginning, working in the community, working with community groups, going around with Father Yanatelli. That I enjoyed also. I enjoyed working with people, and then obviously working with students as dean, the School of Education, and dealing with educational issues. In the public sector, I'd say my time as Speaker of the General Assembly, where I was able to control the agenda and actually create policy that has a great deal of influence, things that I've been able to do, like charter schools and you know bills that we put through on equality. And we passed when I was Speaker a bill that's still in effect uh, that obviously with one of the states that has strong prohibition against assault weapons. We were able to do it back then. Took a lot of heat. What I did at the Board of Education, balancing the Board of Education schools in Bayonne, and then as mayor, doing getting the light rail, developed the light rail, developed a lot of other parks and uh, doing those types of things. So those are the things that I'm proud of. Been able to do that and enjoy the opportunities. But you move on. You always move on.
Yeah, so I've actually noticed that some of the things you were a part of, you said that they took some heat or they were unpopular. Just wondering, how did you handle
It's always you have to you have to do what you think is right. And sometimes what you think is right, the majority may not agree with. Or there might be a vocal minority who don't agree. And you've got to stay true to yourself. You've got to have a moral compass. You've got to know what you believe in. And you've got to then be true to that. But you got to listen too. You can't just be stubborn. You got to be willing to listen and to compromise. Compromise is a good part of the process. You have to be able to bend when bending is necessary. You don't bend on moral issues, but you can bend on all those externals that relate to things. And that's how you get things done.
Dean Doria, I also wanted to ask you, what impact has a Jesuit education had on your growth and your life?
Well, I think I just said, it gives you a moral compass. It gives you values. The values are important. The beliefs, the ability to deal with people, the understanding that there is different points of view, that you have to be able to integrate them and negotiate them and work together to accomplish good, to help people. The ability to be concerned about others, to be able to work with others, to share what you have. All of that's important. And that we're responsible for each other. That's important.
Would you say that's also what makes St. Peter's an important institution of higher learning, or would you say there's also something else?
Well, I think that's a key to it. That's key. And the other thing is, what makes it a unique institution is the cura personalis, the ability to treat each person individually and to help them and to guide them, but to allow them to develop their own abilities, their own skills, their own personalities, and to encourage them to develop their own beliefs within a moral context.
And for my last question, Dean Doria, is there anything you'd like to share that I didn't ask you? Any concluding thoughts that you'd like to add?
I think the most important thing is that we all share this earth. And we all have to work together. And we have to appreciate the gifts that we've been given. And that there is something beyond the present. And we need to realize that we move on. I said earlier, change is part of life. Well, we change, we grow, we develop, we go. And so we have to leave behind something good, have to leave behind something that benefits those that were here with us and those that will come in the future. We have to share. That's what a place like St. Peter's is about. It's about continuing to give, continuing to develop, continuing to share, and to maintain the standards, the morals that are necessary for people to be part of a good society, a caring society, and an ability to love one another. That's important. Doesn't matter where we come from, but it matters where we go.
That was great. Thank you so much, Dean Doria. This was an incredible session. This was actually my first session. So thank you for being patient with me and allowing me to ask you all of those questions.
You did a great job. Great job. Thank you. It was my pleasure. My pleasure. Good luck. Now, what are you going to do when you graduate?
I am going to law school, actually. I was kind of laughing when you said your dad told you not to go to law school, because I was like, I'm going to do that. So
have you started to apply?
I have started to apply. I haven't made a decision yet, but
you got accepted yet to any of the schools?
I got accepted to New York Law School right now, and I'm waiting for some other decisions. It's very slow because a lot of the schools kind of work on their own schedules, so you don't get all your decisions.
Where have you applied? To Rutgers?
I've applied to Rutgers and Seton Hall and a few schools in New York, because New Jersey only has 2 schools.
Yeah, that's right, Rutgers and Seton Hall.
Yeah.
Rutgers has a couple of campuses, has Newark and Camden. You know,
Yes.
there's two campuses, and Seton Hall obviously is Newark. And do you want to live at home, or you?
Yeah, I'm gonna be living at home with my parents.
That makes sense. You're smart.
Yeah.
It's too expensive otherwise, and it's good to live at home. Much more stable. I lived at home until I got married at 32. So I think that you're being smart.
Thank you.
They're very smart.
I also wanted to say, have you ever thought of writing a book? I would read your book.
Thank you. I've thought about it. I just never taken the time. Never taken the time. No, it just is a very time consuming process. Maybe
Yeah.
when I retire from doing this job, if I still can put two sentences together.
Thank you again, Dean Doria.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. And good luck. How many of these are you going to do?
I think about 10.
You're doing all of them?
No, we're aiming for I think 25 to 30, maybe the number's higher. Interviews, and there's a few students involved in the project.
All of them history students, or?
No, they're not. We have a computer science major, we have environmental science. It's a mix of majors.
Oh, you have different mix of majors. Now, your honors program?
I am in the honors program.
Yeah. In the old days, we used to get a beautiful diploma, and it's a big diploma that has, bachelor, and it was in Latin. And at the end, it said in cursu honorum. Now they don't do that nice big, the diploma would be twice the size of your computer screen. That's how big they were. They were very nice. I have one framed in a storage facility someplace where I have all my memorabilia. So
I would want a diploma that size.
yeah, the old ones were, in Latin and very fancy. Now, I said, as the higher the degree, the smaller the diploma. St. Peter's is the biggest. Boston College is almost as big, a little smaller in Latin. The one from Columbia is not even as big as a computer screen on my Apple computer here. So they changed over time.
I wonder why.
Like everything else, it costs more money, so they save money. It's all about money. Okay, take care. My pleasure. Nice talking to you, and see you around campus hopefully someday.
Yes, thank you so much.
And congratulations. Good luck.
Thank you.
Take care. God bless.